Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week, twist those knobs, you, pull some levers, because I'm discussing Invader ZIM, created by Jhonen Vasquez. This show premiered on Nickelodeon back on March 30th, 2001, the same day as The Fairly OddParents. And The Fairly OddParents went on to last 10 seasons, even though along the way it had some cancellations here and there. But still, 10 seasons. It aired its last episode in 2017. And this show, unfortunately, it was canceled in its second season. And it had only 27 episodes. And yet, since then, it's developed such a cult following, a truly passionate vocal fan base, to the point where in 2015, an Invader ZIM comic book series was launched. It's published by Oni Press. And also, we're going to be getting an Invader ZIM TV movie called Invader ZIM Enter the Florpus. And full disclosure, I actually didn't watch this show back when it was airing. I remember only a few bits and pieces of it. And one of the things I remembered was stuff with Grr, really. Like, I remember that dreaded Doom song, you know it. Doom, doom, da doom, da doom. I also remembered randomly from the first episode, The Nightmare Begins, Professor Membrane, when Dib's trying to tell him something, and then Professor Membrane says, "Not now, son, I'm making toast." And then I also remembered in the episode Walk of Doom, when Grr takes out his tracking device, and Zim asks him why, and Grr just says, "To make room for the tuna." So that was just the very few things I had remembered from this show. And so when I went back to watch the series through for the first time, well, the reason I went back to watch it was because it was back in 2016 when Jhonen Vasquez was on an episode of the Nick Animation podcast. And I really missed that podcast. It had 50 episodes. The last one to air was back in November 2017. And that was to promote Hey Arnold, the Jungle Movie. I don't know if that podcast is ever going to come back, but regardless, I listened to it, and I really liked listening to Jhonen and just hearing his creative process and just everything he had to say about the show. And I knew it had such a passionate fan base, and I decided, let me actually check out this Nicktoon. Let's see what this show's about. And so I watched it through that first time, and honestly, I'd put it in my top 5 Nicktoons. I just love it that much now. And it's funny because I don't tend to enjoy science fiction. I don't tend to enjoy paranormal stuff with ghosts or anything with horror or stuff about aliens. All of these obviously major elements of the show, and yet I absolutely love this show. And the plain and simple reason is because I find it hilarious and I love the characters. I love the world. It's just an excellent show. And so before we get into it, let's go ahead and break down the characters. Our protagonist is Zim, a little green alien who's part of the Urkin race. And Zim is this overzealous, overconfident, brash character. And the irony is that he's on a mission, what he thinks is a mission to take over Earth. But really the reason he's doing it is because his leaders, the Almighty Tallest, have banished him from impending doom too, and so they're doing this as a joke just to get rid of him. So he's not part of the operation at all to take over planets, that the alien race, that's their goal. And yet he's determined, but his biggest fault really is that he's not exactly competent, and also he's just blinded by his own ego. He's something. He's crazy, to put it bluntly. And then we have his little robot sidekick, Grr. And Grr is a standard issue information retrieval unit, otherwise known as a SIR unit, and all of the Urkins are given these SIR units. But Grr is one that doesn't work properly because Zim's leaders, they purposely gave him a broken one. They just threw some junk together, put pieces together, and just gave him this SIR unit. And so Grr is far from a competent robot, far from a helpful, functioning sidekick for Zim. And that's his whole shtick, really. He loves to eat, he loves to scream and run around and just do random things. He's definitely a fan favorite, but personally, he's not my favorite character. My favorite character, believe it or not, is Dib. And Dib is Zim's mortal enemy. Dib is the one kid who, I shouldn't say the one kid actually, but Dib is the only one who cares that Zim is an alien and wants to take him down. And Dib is very obsessive with the paranormal, with things like Bigfoot, with all spooky things, with ghosts, etc. And the sad thing, though, is no one believes him, and Dib is really, truly he's an underdog character, because he can never catch a break. No one cares about his quest to stop Zim, and he loses a lot in every episode. And then there's Dib's little sister, Gaz. And Gaz is this really angry little girl who, she's the only other character actually that knows Zim's an alien, but it's funny because she doesn't care at all, because she knows Zim isn't a threat to Earth, because he's so bad at taking over the Earth. And Gaz, she loves video games. That's her main love and her main interest. She loves video games, she loves piggies, she loves pizza. And I think of those four, Zim, Dib, Gaz, and Gur, as the main four characters, but there are a few others. We also have the Almighty Tallest Red, and Almighty Tallest Purple, Zim's leaders, and they're just kind of a couple of jerks because they're in power, so they can do whatever they want. We also have Dib and Gaz's father, Professor Membrane, and he's an interesting character because he's really a neglectful parent. It's really sad when you think about Dib and Gaz's home life. It's interesting. Another character that I love, though, is Miss Bitters, Dib's teacher, and also Zim's teacher, since Zim decides he has to go to school to learn about the human race. And actually, when I started watching this show, the other thing I had remembered about it was the theme song. The theme song is excellent. It's composed by a guy named Mark Tortorici, and then it's arranged by the series composer, Kevin Banthy. Kevin Banthy is such a talented composer. He was actually first composing video games before he came to work on Invader ZIM, and this is actually the first animated series he ever worked on, so that's cool. The music in the show is fantastic. That's one of the other main things I really love about it. But really, like I said, I love the world. It's so interesting, so chaotic, so bizarre. And one of the things I also remembered when I was a kid, one of the first things I noticed was when Zim spoke, I basically immediately realized, oh, that's Daggett's voice. Daggett from the Angry Beavers. And that was part of the reservations, actually, from Nickelodeon executives, that they didn't want Richard Horvitz, who voices Zim, to voice the character because he was already attached to Daggett from the Angry Beavers. And so when Angry Beavers ended, he was finally able to come on board. And because in the pilot, when the show was sold before it went to series, in the pilot episode, Zim is actually voiced by Billy West, which is so jarring because you're just used to hearing Richard Horvitz. And it's funny because Richard Horvitz has said in interviews that he had first auditioned for the role of Dib, which I can't even picture Dib with Richard Horvitz's voice. He was just meant to play Zim in all of his craziness. And Dib is voiced by Andy Berman. Melissa Fahn voices Gaz. Fun fact about Melissa Fahn is that she was actually in the original cast of Wicked. She was the understudy for Kristen Chenoweth, who played Glinda the Good Witch. And Ricky Simons voices Gur. And Ricky Simons got the role because first he was working with Jhonen on one of his comics called I Feel Sick, and then Jhonen couldn't find anyone to play Gur because he just didn't like the people who were auditioning, so then Ricky gave it a shot, and Jhonen hired him because he liked that he performed it badly. That's the whole point, that Gur is a malfunctioning robot, so he's just got some crazy things going on. And so, like I said, Dib's my favorite character, And part of that, honestly, is sympathy. I just feel so bad for the kid, because can he ever get a win? I mean, my gosh. But, so there's that, and also the fact that he's very tenacious and headstrong. He never gives up. Even though, as the series progressed, he sort of started to care not as much about Zim's conquest to take over Earth. He sort of was like, okay, this is stupid, but... So that's funny. But still, he was determined. And part of that, though, is because he wants the glory, he wants the recognition that, oh, hey, I took down this alien, even though literally no one cares. Literally no one. But I just love Dib. I feel for the kid. He's a great character, and I love his voice. And so, right off the bat, with Zim, when he's trying to prove to the tallest that he deserves to be an invader, in the first episode of the series, The Nightmare Begins, a great line, he says, "But Invader's blood marches through my veins like giant radioactive rubber pants! The pants command me, do not ignore my veins!" And fun fact about that line, the reason he says rubber pants, the line was actually rubber ants, but Richard Horvitz had said pants, and Jhonen liked it, so they just left it in. I always love fun behind-the-scenes facts like that. This show, by the way, has a fantastic DVD release, because there's episode commentaries with Jhonen, with the voice cast, with storyboard artists, with the writers. There's a lot of great stuff. But with Zim, he's an interesting... Well, to be honest, he's not that complex of a character. He just... People would describe him maybe as kind of dumb. Personally, I don't see it that way. I see him more as clueless in terms of the fact that his mission is a lie and that he thinks he's this amazing invader, but really he's just not good at what he does. So that's funny. And basically all the time he's just screaming. There's very few times when he just speaks calmly. So that's funny too, when he's actually calm for a second. But what's funny is the one and only time he's ever actually rational in the show that I couldn't really pinpoint, it's in the episode Walk of Doom. Gur's crying because Zim's mad at him that he lost the tracking device, but really Gur's upset because he ate his cupcake and he misses his cupcake. But Zim's angry because they need to get home, and then Zim says, "I can see that you understand your mistake, Gur, and me being angry will get us no closer to home." Wow, that's very rational. That's very practical of you, Zim. Good for you. But more often than not, he's just absolutely unhinged. And Jhonen Vasquez has described that the tenets of this show are sarcasm, cruelty, and violence, which I absolutely agree. In fact, I would even throw in rage, insanity, and a dash, or perhaps much more of a dash, of stupidity. Just straight up idiocy. Because what's funny about this show is that I see it as like all this madness encased in apathy, in terms of none of the other characters caring about Zim or Dib, really. That's what's unique about Zim and Dib's dynamic, the fact that they're the only ones who care about stopping the other. So they give purpose to each other's goals, really. Zim is the only one who takes Dib seriously, and vice versa, which is really interesting when you think about it. So really, I would say Dib's my favorite character, then Zim, because I do love Zim, and then I would say Miss Bitters is my third favorite. And I love Miss Bitters because every single one of her lines I find is amazing, truly. I think my favorite line of hers, it's from the episode Door to Door, when they're trying to sell candy, and they don't sell that much, I guess, and then Miss Bitters declares, "Children, your performance was miserable. Your parents will all receive phone calls instructing them to love you less now." Savage. Absolutely savage. So funny. Oh my goodness. So if there had been an episode with, say, Zim and Dib in detention and Miss Bitters just sitting there having to watch them, that probably would have been my favorite episode. It's just so funny. But one of my favorite episodes, it's called Bad Bad Rubber Piggy, written by Eric Trueheart. And in that one, it's so interesting because Zim is using this time portal to mess with Dib and basically make Dib kind of disappear from existence. And he discovers that if he throws an object in there, it can change the present. And so he decides to use rubber piggies. And Gur's just so upset because he has to keep giving up his rubber piggy toys. But that's one of the one moments where Gur actually kind of comprehends what's going on. Because most of the time, Gur just screams nonsense. He's very much has the mentality of a toddler. Gur's a good character, don't get me wrong. He's got some funny moments, which I've laughed hard at Gur. And without him, the show wouldn't be as funny, for sure. But in Bad Bad Rubber Piggy, he just has a good line where he just goes, "Wait, if you destroy Dib in the past, then he won't ever be your enemy. Then you won't have to send a robot back to destroy him, and then he will be your enemy, so you'll have to send a robot back." And then he just explodes because he can't comprehend all of that. And then that episode ends so funny because Zim has to destroy the portal. He keeps throwing all these piggies, and then he sends himself back in time to stop himself. And so he throws a note on a piggy and throws it, and then it doesn't work out. His brain somehow is replaced with a rubber piggy. And then on the note it says, "Zim, don't use the time machine. Love, Zim." And honestly, the line deliveries, Richard Horvitz as Zim, it's such an amazing character. Oh my gosh. And he's said that, like, the high-pitched stuff when he goes up and down, that's, like, stuff he brought to the role. Also, when he goes, like, he does a lot of those little sounds and everything. Jhonen Vasquez has said that he wasn't supposed to make those sounds, but that's something Richard brought to the role and just makes it funnier. And honestly, this show, I'd argue the darkest show Nickelodeon has ever produced. Frankly, I think part of the reason the reason this show was canceled was due to low ratings and high budget costs. But with all its dark content and everything, I feel like it could have flourished on a network block such as Adult Swim. But the fact that it's back now in comic book form, that says a lot. And the fact that also we're getting a TV movie. So the fan base has spoken, and there you go. Also, this show, it spawned its own convention. It's called Invader Con, and that was back in 2011. They had one also in 2012, and then in 2014. And maybe there'll be another one, who knows, after the TV movie premieres. We'll see. Oh, another character I forgot to mention, actually, is Zim's computer, and he happens to be voiced by Jhonen Vasquez, but they just pitch the voice to make it sound all distorted. And he's got some hilarious lines. In the episode FBI Warning of Doom, Zim asks the computer to give him some information about the FBI. The computer tells him the FBI is a government law enforcement agency. Zim tells him to continue. The computer has insufficient data. So Zim says, "Can't you just make an educated guess?" And then the computer says, "Okay, founded in 1492 by demons, the FBI is a crack law enforcement agency designed to, fight aliens." So funny. And just the fact that this computer has a personality and has an attitude all the time. Another just funny moment with the computer in the episode, one of my favorite episodes, called Tack the Hideous New Girl. Zim summons the computer and he just goes, "What?" Like, he can't be bothered. Leave the computer alone. He doesn't want to be bothered with Zim's nonsense. So really, all of these characters are just have their own levels of craziness. You could argue that the sanest character on this show is Gaz, Dib's little sister. I feel like she's also the most intelligent character, even though her brother's smart, and also their dad, Professor Membrane. Professor Membrane, by the way, is voiced by Roger Bumpus, aka the voice of Squidward Tentacles. Which was so surprising to me when I first found that out, because I know voice actors are versatile and everything, but it's just, they sound absolutely nothing alike. Even the cadences with the way Professor Membrane speaks and the way Squidward speaks. But anyway, Gaz is a character with just very simple wants. Usually she just wants pizza, or she just wants to play her little video games, her game slave, as a handheld gaming device. And even her first line in the show, in The Nightmare Begins, her first line is, "Dib drank the last soda. He will pay." So she has such contempt for her brother. And that being said, even though she doesn't care about her brother's interests, really that goes both ways, because Dib doesn't particularly care about Gaz's interests and the fact that she cares about video games. He doesn't care about that at all. And honestly, I'd argue that he cares less about her interests than she cares about his. At least she kind of appeases him and she goes along with things for him. And she sort of helps him out in odd ways, in her own ways. They have an interesting dynamic. Because on the surface, it's like, oh, quarreling brother and sister. Even though really, you could tell Dib loves his sister and he's protective of her. But honestly, you could tell it's much more subtle, don't get me wrong. But you can tell, too, I see it anyway, that Gaz does love her brother. And reason being is because she respects her dad. And, you know, at the end of the day, they're all family. But a good Gaz episode one of them is Bloaty's Pizza Hog. In that episode, Gaz just wants to have pizza with their dad. But really, it's so funny at the beginning because she's drawing a piggy and Dib's prattling on about he's going to break into Zim's base. And then Gaz just says, "I'm trying to draw a little piggy. Can't you see I'm trying to draw a little piggy? Be quiet." And Dib tells her, "Don't you care that Zim is trying to destroy all mankind, huh?" And Gaz just says, "But he's so bad at it." He certainly is, Gaz. But then she has to rescue Dib because the only way she'll get to eat pizza with her dad is if they're all together for family night. And he's so busy all the time. He's busy with his research and with his show. They only touch upon his show, really, in the episode Battle Dib, when Dib has to do all these trials just to get in to see his father. And his father, Professor Memory, doesn't even ever address Dib and Gaz as by their names. He always just says son and daughter. And there's no mention at all of their mother, if she even exists, who knows. But back to Bloaty's Pizza Hog. Gaz has to rescue Dib from Zim's base. And first, she sees Zim's going to perform some experiments on Dib, and she thinks, just one experiment. And Zim says he's going to turn Dib's organs inside out. So Gaz has vision thinking, "Okay, Dad, we can go to Bloaty's now." And she just pulls up this pile of organs that apparently is Dib, and Professor Membrane says, No, we can't go anywhere with him like that. Family night is canceled until his organs are inside him again. So she decides she has to save Dib. And so he's in this containment unit, and then Zim says, "I made that containment chamber myself. I would destroy you right now if I didn't expect to get so much enjoyment from watching you try to get him out." And Gaz just gives it a little kick. It cracks. That's it. She takes her brother. She's really the true one to be scared of. And then at the end, you know what? That actually is a small win for Dib in that episode, because then Zim runs out all terrified when they go to Bloaty's Pizza Hog. And Gaz at the end says, "There, see, you won. Eat your pizza." She just throws a slice of pizza in his face because he's bound up, because she just strapped him to something so she could get him there. Bloaty, by the way, is voiced also by Ricky Simons. And Bloaty is just this guy in a pig costume, and then when he takes off the pig costume, he's even fatter. So odd. But really, the darker stuff in this show, I think, happens really early on, because just in the second episode of this show, called Bestest Friend, it's about a little boy named Keith, who, by the way, is voiced by Danny Cooksey, aka the voice of Montana Max from Tiny Toon Adventures. But more importantly, he was the voice of Stoop Kid from Hey Arnold. So impressive roster. But in this show, he's Keith. And Keith is this little kid who just becomes obsessed with Zim because Zim decides he needs to have a best friend in order to seem more like a human. And then when Zim wants to get rid of this kid, toward the end of the episode, he gives him a gift. And Keith is all super happy and excited. He opens it up, and then we just see the shadow on the wall. We don't see the actual thing happening to the kid, but with the shadows, we see these robot arms pull out his eyes and replace his eyes with robot eyes, which is disturbing to say the least. And the reason they got around that was because they told Nickelodeon that, well, he has better eyes now, so it's okay. He's better off in the end. So there you go. Another truly disturbing episode is the episode Dark Harvest. And in that one, Zim is just stealing everyone's organs to seem more like a human. And at one point, an intestine rolls out and he just slurps it back up. So gross. My goodness. But it was funny how there were also, honestly, a lot of deaths in this show. It's just they didn't draw attention to it, so I guess they were able to get away with it. There's that episode Hamstergeddon with Zim takes the class hamster, makes it, he mutates it so it becomes giant, and it's just destroying the city, and it basically eats and crushes people. It's crazy. There's also there was originally a death in the episode Game Slave 2, which, by the way, is one of 3 episodes that doesn't feature Zim. In Game Slave 2, Gaz wants to get the new gaming device. She just throws out her old Game Slave, and it goes in the trash, and its soul rises up. A random funny sight gag. But she misses out on the last one because some kid just claims to be the name of the person who had pre-ordered the Game Slave 2. So he takes it, and Gaz was supposed to get the last one, and then she just seeks vengeance on this kid, Iggins, and by the end she gets the Game Slave 2, and the kid just plummets down an elevator and crashes, and basically he was left for dead, but then they have him spring up, and he flies up, and he's apparently can fly now. Because the note from Nickelodeon apparently was that the audience needs to know that the kid was okay. So Jhonen Vasquez and his team, his way around it was to have the kid fly up and be like, see, he's super healthy now because he can fly. So they had unique ways of dealing with network notes and everything. I'll get to more in a bit. But to continue on with other favorite moments. So most of the episodes, they were the standard 11-minute segments, but there were a handful of half-hour episodes. One of them was an episode called Battle of the Planets, when Zim basically takes over Mars and he decides he's going to control Mars as this ship and crush Earth with it slowly. And by the way, Jhonen voices various one-off characters, so in this episode he voices a character just screaming his head off when Zim comes down with Mars and it crushes the character's can of, in this show they call it Poop Cola. That's their brand of soda, Poop. Yup. So, and that one he's just screaming his head off, and that's Jhonen just going crazy. But that episode, I didn't talk about the almighty Tallest much yet. They have some funny lines too. Tallest Red is voiced by Wally Wingert, and Tallest Purple is voiced by Kevin McDonald. Purple is kind of the dumber one of the two, and Red is he's the snarkier one. But they have a lot of funny lines. Even when they give Zim Gur in the first episode, The Nightmare Begins, and Purple Zim says, it looks kind of not good. And then when Gur starts hitting his head, Zim asks them, is it supposed to be stupid? And Purple says, it's not stupid, it's advanced. Okay, but another hilarious almighty Tallest moment, also from Purple, in the Battle of the Planets episode, back to that. They are talking about impending Doom 2 and how it's great that Zim isn't here because he'd be ruining everything. And then they ask if they remember that, and one Urkin says, I don't. So Purple says, seize that guy, and throw him out the airlock. So they do that. You just hear a scream, a painful scream, and then Purple says, that was the wrong guy, but that's okay. I think everyone gets the point. Oh my god. Oh jeez. Also in that episode, there's a great Professor Membrane moment. He just wants, he talks about Dib, he wants Dib to only focus on real science, and he just holds up a puppet of himself. And so then later in the episode, he asks Dib where he's going, and Dib says, oh, you know, and Professor Membrane's puppet says, to save the Earth. And Dib says, yes, and then after he runs out, Professor Membrane says, my poor insane son. Like, you're kind of insane too. They're all insane in their own ways. But one of the hardest I laughed was in the episode Abducted, and in that episode there are two aliens who make Zim look like this genius because they're absolute morons, but they abduct Zim because they think Zim is a human, and they're going to like perform tests on him, I guess. But before they abduct him, Zim yells at Gur to go into defensive mode, and Gur just jumps up and immediately jumps into the alien's bag. And that got such a huge laugh out of me when I first watched that because it was just ridiculous. And those two aliens, I don't know if they have names or just like a blue and green alien. They might have names, I can't recall at the moment. But at one point, one of them asks, when's the last time you cleaned yourself? And the other one just says, define self! Oh, by the way, another great Almighty Tallest moment in the episode Walk for Your Lives, when Red says, hey, Zim's next on the list. Should we even inspect him? I mean, he's not really an invader, and we hate him. By the way, in case you forgot. And then later when Zim calls them, and then Purple just says, well, you look real busy exploding, Zim. They're so mean to the Urkins. What's funny about the Urkins is that, so their whole mission for the Urkins is to take over planets, and then they just turn each planet in for one job function. They have planet Kolnawia, Judgmentia, Food Cordia. So I wonder if Zim's mission were real, and if he really did conquer Earth, what would they turn Earth into? Maybe something like Garbage Dumpia. For us on Earth, who knows? Actually, in this show, Earth, it's not meant to be our Earth. Jhonen has said that it's basically a parody of Earth. It's some parallel, odd, obscure version of Earth. And it's also set in the way distant future. That's only alluded to a couple of times, but that's apparently true to the show. That's not in the present. But there aren't that many moments with other Urkin invaders. There are a few, but since the show unfortunately was canceled early on, they didn't get to develop as much as they would have liked to. But one of the Urkins is Scooge, and he's just this plump Urkin. And in the episode Hobo 13, when Zim is sent for training on another planet, and then he sees Scooge, and Zim says, Scooge? I thought the Almighty Tallest killed you. And Scooge says, yeah, but I'm okay now. And apparently Scooge was supposed to end up living with Zim, which would have been interesting. But moving on, since I mentioned Hobo 13, another funny line when they need a leader, and Zim just says, I choose me! Zim shall lead! Object and taste my revolting vengeance of power! I love the dialogue in this show. It's fantastic. Another funny episode I love, it's Mysterious Mysteries, and that's a show that Dib watches. The full title is Mysterious Mysteries of Strange Mystery, and they basically just dissect the paranormal and talk about things like Bigfoot and all creatures and everything. But the host of the show keeps denying. They have a whole archive of just Dib stuff when he's trying to show Zim the alien. And finally, the guy decides to do an episode on that because, like, he's afraid of getting canceled and he's desperate for something new. And so that one's just so funny because each of the characters, Zim, Dib, Gaz, and Gur, they do a retelling of Dib going to find Zim and recording him and whatever. And it's just the horrible, poorly acted reenactments. It's just so ridiculous and dumb. And then Gur, in that episode, he shows up saying his name is Stacy, and they blur Gur out. And then Gur gives his telling of what's going on, and he says, then a giant squirrel showed up. And Zim just yells, Gur! And the host says, thinking that it's a woman. doesn't know it's a robot. He says, "Let her talk. Can't you see she's upset?" That was just so funny to me. I don't know. Maybe it was the delivery. But then Gur just tells this whole story, and then he just says talking about a flying squirrel, and then he says, "After that, he flew back to his home planet to fight all the bad guys." And the host says, "What does that have to do with anything?" And Gur just says, "Me and the squirrel are friends." And then the anger just sits there and twitches, and he says, "I'm so fired." Well, the only conclusion I can come to is that Dib is crazy. This one here, definitely crazy. I feel bad for the ugly green kid, but there's a decent chance he's crazy too. And Zim just says, "But not an alien." And the anchor says, "No." And Zim says, "Okay." One of the few moments when Zim is calm for a second. Another one, as I'm thinking of it, another one is in the episode Gur Goes Crazy and Stuff, when Zim decides he wants to make Gur an actual functioning SUR unit. And by the way, quick tangent. Gur, well, the first thing Zim asks him is, "What does the G stand for?" And Gur says, "I don't know." But Ricky Simons, when he's asked, he says it stands for garbage, which I agree with that. I can get on board with that. That makes sense. Anyway, as I was saying, in the episode Gur Goes Crazy and Stuff, when Gur is screaming wildly or whatever, and then at one point Zim just says, "I don't like you." Like, just quiet and restrained for once, not screaming at the top of his... He doesn't have lungs, just screaming his head off. But this series has a few holiday specials which are great. The Halloween episode, for example, it's called Halloween Spectacular of Spooky Doom. And in that episode, Dib he becomes trapped inside his own imagination, his own nightmare world. It's so crazy and bizarre and dark, and Zim ends up getting captured with him, and then he has to escape, and it's just a funny dynamic with the two of them being forced to work together. But that one, there's a funny, stupid gag where in Dib's nightmare world, and then there's this race of all different aliens and creatures that are working for the Nightmare Miss Bitters. And at one point, one of them, she banishes them and she says, "You will be condemned to the realm of eternal screaming and restlessness." And the creature replies, "But I don't really want to go there." And Nightmare Bitters says, "You'll just have to accept it. Here's your ticket." So she hands him a ticket and his eyes start watering, and then a pit opens and it's just all these flames, and he just walks away all sad. He turns back and he says, "Well, see you guys." He takes his suitcase, he puts on his hat, and he walks off into the eternal realm of screaming and restlessness. But since I briefly mentioned Dib and Zim being forced to work together, in the episode Balonius Maximus, Zim he uses a little tack to turn Dib into this, basically a giant blob of baloney, and then Dib uses it back to turn Zim into baloney, and then they have to work together to use use Dib's technology from his dad's lab, since it doesn't recognize him anymore since he's just baloney. And so they're forced to work together, and then in the end they just stay as baloney, just blobs of baloney. It doesn't get resolved. So there are a few episodes where it's like that. It's just kind of an ending where it doesn't have an actual resolution. There's that one. There's also the Hobo 13, where at the end Zim is just hurtling towards the sun. And Jhonen has said that he sees him poking fun at himself, just saying it's lazy writing, but it's fine. It's just funny, really. Don't need to look too much into it. But that's one of the unique things about this show. It's just nonsense and weirdness. But the fact that the characters take everything so seriously, that just adds to the humor. The fact that Zim himself is just so determined and relentless, and yet he can't figure out what to do in terms of taking over the Earth, even though his whole mission is a sham anyway. It's hilarious. And by the way, kind of on a random note, but Richard Horvitz has said that his favorite exchange in the entire show was in the episode Rise of the Zip Boy, when Zim is scrubbing his face with cleansing chalk, and then there's also all of a sudden a piece of bacon, and he just screams, "Why was there bacon in the soap?" And Gur replies, "I made it myself." That is ridiculous. I like that one too. It's not my favorite though, but really my favorite interactions are between Zim and Dib, because they're just so, the way they play off of each other, it's just hilarious. One of my favorite episodes is Tak, the Hideous New Girl. That features a character named Tak, who turns out to be an Urkin, and she is another character who's supposed to be involved more with the series, but since the series was canceled, that didn't happen. She's voiced by Olivia Dabo. So in that episode, it's actually set on Valentine's Day, and the kids are handing out meat slabs, and at one point Dib asks, "I heard long ago that kids got candy and cards on Valentine's Day, or like years ago," so that's one hint that this show is set in the distant future, bizarre, distorted future, who knows. But that one's got some great Miss Bitters moments when she finds out they're getting another student, and she says, "Oh, another one?" And she hangs up the phone, and she says, "To celebrate overcrowding in school, a new student will be joining the class." So then we meet Tak, who's this gothic-looking girl, and she says, "My father's the head of the Delicious Weenie Corporation. That was his jet out there, so I brought Valentine's weenies for everyone." And she throws weenies at everyone. They go crazy. They love it. And then she stands up on the desk and she says, "Except for that kid." And she points to Zim. And she says, "For him, I have prepared a poem." And then one of the girls says, "Looks like Zim has a girlfriend." And Tak rips up she just tears her paper in half. And she says, "It's not nice to embarrass people. You should apologize and eat your eraser." And she apparently has the power to hypnotize people because her eyes just kind of spark, and then the girl apologizes and she eats she just has this giant eraser that she eats. So then Tak gives her poem. She says, "For longer than I can remember, I've been looking for someone like you, someone with a head like yours and a torso too. Birds sing and you're gonna pay. The end. Here's some meat covered in barbecue sauce." And it's poop barbecue sauce. More of that poop brand. So bizarre. And then Miss Bitter says, "Thank you, Tak. That was horrible. Now you'll need a place to sit. You're being transferred to the underground classroom." And the kid just, the floor opens up. There goes the kid. He's gone. And then Miss Bitters points to another kid and she says, "And you, I'm just tired of you." And then later on in that episode, Zim calls his tallest. And that's a great tallest moment because they're just playing around with puppets of themselves and Zim doesn't even notice. They're behind the couch, and then there's marionettes of themselves, and they're just giggling and finding this hilarious, thinking they're messing with Zim, but he doesn't even notice. And so he tells them, "My tallest, a new child attacked me with meat. My conclusion, she's in love with me. This may prove valuable, as I can use the child to learn more about human affection, which, from what I have been able to determine, is pain-based." His delivery of that affection, I love it. And then Purple just says, they're just giggling and laughing. His arm falls off of the marionette, and he says, "Don't worry, it's just my arms flailing and giggling." Later on, Tak reveals herself as an Urkin, and she explains that this isn't about vengeance, it's about taking what's rightfully hers, because she was supposed to be an invader, but Zim basically ruined her plans because he just wanted a snack, and then from the vending machine, it just blew out all the power, so then she was trapped and she couldn't take the test to qualify as an invader. And I mean, basically she disguises herself and just so easily blends in with the humans to the point where Dib doesn't even notice that she's actually an alien, and even when Zim tries to tell him, because Zim doesn't want Tak to take over his mission. But so this episode, after the act break, when it comes back, there's just a ham monster attacking Zim, and then just runs away, and then Zim just says, "What a horrible adventure with that ham demon." But just a random non sequitur thing that has nothing to do with anything in the episode, but it's just so funny. And this is one of the few episodes where there's a scene with just Zim, Dib, Gaz, and Gur. The other one really is from the episode Bloaty's Pizza Hog. But in this one, they sort of basically reluctantly all work together to put a stop to Tak. And after Zim leaves and Dib leaves, and then Gaz is just standing in Zim's base, and she says, "Are there any video games around here?" And Zim's computer says, "No, not really." And then Gaz says, "I guess I'll help save the Earth then." So reluctant. It's so funny. And then Tak actually tells Zim that his mission is a lie, but he just doesn't, because she's trying to like take him down, but he just doesn't, it doesn't faze him at all. He just presses a button and she goes flying away. Oh, and there's one part where he says, "You're a worse pilot than I am." Wait, a rare moment where he actually realizes his incompetence. But this episode is actually the season 1 finale, and it ends with Tak's ship just crashing, and then Dib's face just lights up because he has a chance to use this ship to go up into space and try to defeat Zim, supposedly. And then in the following episode, the season 2 premiere, Backseat Drivers from Beyond the Stars, another great episode. It opens with Zim just this almost minute-long sequence of Zim screaming "my tallest" in all these different ways. And then Red just says, "I was curious to see when you'd shut up on your own, but it's been 3 hours now, Zim. 3 hours! So, what is it?" And Zim says, "I just noticed that you're traveling closer to the Earth than ever before." And Purple says, "How do you know that?" And Zim says, "Oh, I know all kinds of things about you. Pretty creepy, huh? Anyhow, I was..." And Purple says, "Hey, that is creepy. You're creepy, Zim." And Zim says, "Heh, yes, I sure am." And then, okay, so then when the transmission call ends, Zim just stands there, and then the computer eventually tells him it's been an hour, Zim. And then a turkey explodes, and it's Gurr, and he says, "It's me! I was the turkey all along!" That's one of Ricky Simon's favorite lines. But then, in a nice Gaz and Dib moment, a nice Gaz moment, really. So Gaz is talking to her dad, and Professor Membrane says, "What's your brother doing this time? He's not trying to raise the dead again, is he? Always with the dead, that boy." And Gaz says, "He's talking." And Professor Membrane says, "Oh, is that all?" And he puts her on his shoulder, which is cute, and he says, "Daughter, some people like to talk. Your brother likes to talk about insane things. Maybe he'll become less insane if you listen." And Gaz says, "But his voice fills me with a terrible rage." And Professor Membrane says, "I know it does, honey. I know it does." But then Gaz goes back because she respects her dad, and she goes back to listen to Dib, and Dib is just still talking, and then he just turns and she just sits down. He says, "Anyway, you know all about how I planted the spy bug in Zim's lab during the whole Tak invasion." And this is one of my favorite moments. He says, "You remember, wasn't that beautiful? Let's go back there for a second." This is personally one of my favorite exchanges. Dib just says, "Hey, look at that garbage can!" And so then he throws his spy bug, and then Zim's response, he says, "Yes, it is rather impressive, that can." That was just so hilarious to me the first time I watched it. I can't explain why. I guess because the fact that there was a can there and the fact that Zim found it impressive, so stupid. And then another funny exchange between Zim and Dib in this episode was when Zim is basically trying to remotely control the Massive, which is the Urkin Empire, and he's trying to control it, and then Dib comes along trying to take over the controls because he's using Tak's ship. And then Zim at one point says, "You're nothing, Earth boy. Go home and shave your giant head of smell with your bad self." And then there's a beat, and then Dib says, "Okay, there's all kinds of things wrong with what you just said." And then one more great moment from that episode. Toward the end, Zim says, "Ha, watch, Dib. Watch as I bring a royal audience to the downfall of the human race." And Dib says, "I don't want to watch that." And Zim says, "Oh, okay." And then he just says, "Wait, that's too bad, because mankind ends now. And to make it even sweeter, I'll land the Massive right on top of your landing pad-sized monster of a..." I butchered that. Let me try that again. "I'll land the Massive right on top of your landing pad-sized monster of a head, which is disturbingly large." And Dib runs away screaming, "No, and quit making fun of my head." That's a recurring gag on the show, making fun of Dib's head. I think the first mention of it was actually from Gurr, in the episode Door to Door, when out of nowhere he just says, "Why is his head so big? Why is his head so big?" And on a random side note, there were a couple of instances where Ricky Simons has said that, so they would do, like on any show, they would do multiple takes of the same lines, and then with this show, Jhonen Vasquez would just find all the lines hilarious, so then he would just use them all. So he mostly did that with Gurr's lines, but there were a couple with Zim's. But with Gurr's, another one was when he just says over and over, "You want to make biscuits?" And another one is also when he just has a piggy, he's having a tea party with a piggy, and he just says, "I gotta go, pig, I'll see you later." And then he just gets in the pig's face and says, "I gotta go, pig, I'll see you later." So that's just a random fun fact there. And speaking of the biscuits line, that's in the episode The Girl Who Cried Gnome. Zim is he's just hilarious in that episode. He says, "Oh, what is it this time? I haven't the patience for, girl with cookies, computer, release the robot gopher." So this little girl who wants to sell cookies, and then she just gets stuck in this pile of dirt after the gopher pops up, and then her name is Moofy, by the way, and so then she's just screaming her head off, and then some random person is like, "Oh, someone call the media!" And then the news anchor says, "We are here in minute 4 of this poor girl's ordeal." It's just so stupid. But then later on, Dib wants to use this opportunity to expose Zim, since the media is following this girl who's supposedly trapped, even though she could just lift her foot and get right out, but that's part of the ridiculousness of this show that makes it hilarious. But anyway, later on, Zim says, the dib, I don't care how delicious he is, he's evil. Now they'll find the base, there's only one thing I can do." And Gurr just over and over keeps saying, "You're gonna make biscuits, you're gonna make biscuits." And then Zim, all dark, he just says, "No, Gurr, never. I never want you to mention biscuits ever again." So odd. And then that episode ends with poor Dib getting stuck in the gopher hole somehow. I don't know. Because after Zim just pulls the girl out, he's like, "Be gone with you, cookie beast." He pulls her out and she's free. And she's just all happy because she loved all the attention. That little moofy, girly ranger kid. And so that episode ends with Dib caught in the gopher hole and just the robot gopher swirling around him. I felt bad for Dib. But honestly, so the worst I felt for Dib was in the episode Dib's Wonderful Life. And in that one, Dib just throws a muffin at Zim's head, and Zim's determined to find out who did it. And so then there's just this whole montage of Dib basically taking down Zim once and for all. And Zim says, "It's been nice working with you, Gurr. Now self-destruct." And Gurr just says, "Finally!" And he explodes. And so then Dib keeps having all this success, and we just see him grow up, and everyone, he's this hero, the hero that he always wanted to be, and he does all these great things for Earth. At the end, he's being interviewed, and he says, he's asked if he threw the muffin at Zim's head, and he says, "Yes, I did." And then all of a sudden, the person changes into Zim, and everyone changes into Zim, laughing maniacally. And so then we find out that the whole thing was just this false reality that Zim created just to get Dib to confess that he threw the muffin at Zim. And then it ends, so none of it was ever happened. And so then Dib just walks away all defeated, and then Zim says, "Wait!" and he throws a muffin at him, and then Dib's just like, "You stink, Zib." I felt so bad for Zib in that Zib, what am I saying? I felt so bad for Dib in that moment. Poor Dib. And a lot of his misery, though, it also comes from the fact that he has no true allies. He sort of has an ally in Gaz, sort of. In the episode Gaz, the Taster of Pork, he decides to put this curse on Gaz because he wants to test something out, and so the curse ends up being that she can only taste pork no matter what she eats, and everything tastes so disgusting to her. And so she's so angry at him, and she wants him to find a cure. And so then he has to go to this world where, in the end, Gaz would have been rid of the curse, but instead Dib takes the fall and he wants to help his little sister. So basically it was all for nothing that he ends up cleaning toilets. But in that episode, actually, there's a blink and you'll miss it moment of a truly nice moment between Dib and Gaz. And it's actually a moment that's not referenced to at all, and it's so out of place in this show because there's never any heartwarming moments in this show. But it's a moment where as Dib and Gaz are walking up to their house, they're just holding hands. How cute is that? And it's a wide shot. It's probably, maybe it was one of the storyboard artists threw it in and then they just animated it, and who knows, but it's there regardless. Literally 2-second moment of Dib and Gaz holding hands, being cute little brother and sister. How sweet. That episode is also a half hour. And that one, Zim is only in one scene, really. But the one scene he's in, it's Dib trying to ask for help, and Zim's just... And at one point he says, I helped you when we were turned into giant balloonies. And Zim just says, you're making it up! He just accuses people of lying a lot. It's funny. But another excellent half-hour episode is The Fry Cook, What Came From All That Space. What a great grammatically incorrect title. But in that episode, an Urkin named Sizzlor takes Zim to planet Foodcordia because that's where Zim was originally before he escaped because he was banished from Impending Doom 2. And so he was banished there to just work as a fry cook all his life. But then he wanted to be in Impending Doom 2, so he was able to escape. But in that episode, the character brings him back. So before that, though, Dib is still trying to get people to believe that Zim is an alien, and then they cut to Zim and he's just operating on a kid, and then he just throws that away, and he just says, I sure like TV and wearing pants. And then one of the kids says, he likes wearing pants, Dib. Aliens don't like wearing pants. That's all it takes for them to believe. But in that one, Zim is forced to once again work as a fry cook, and he just wants to escape again. But he has to stay there for the foodening, this busy time for Foodcordia. But there's a funny moment with Sizzlor and Zim when Sizzlor says, you're here as punishment for almost annihilating our civilization. And Zim just says, am I the only one who was impressed by that? Clearly you are, Zim. And then another funny moment is when Zim just says, laugh now, Sizzlor, but you will know not to mess with Invader ZIM. And Sizzlor just says, all deadpan, I wasn't laughing. I haven't laughed since yesterday. That episode is just so funny. Another hilarious running gag in that episode, too, is just there's this little purple alien kid who's wearing a hat and he has one tooth. And just throughout the episode, through all the action, all the weird stuff going on, he just stares all wide-eyed and amazed at everything going on, just so entranced by it all. So funny. But another hilarious episode was Zim Eats Waffles. The premise for that one was that they wanted to have an ongoing single shot, but it didn't end up that way. It ended up kind of going back between Dib watching Zim on the webcam and then things going on with Dib trying to get... Oh, I didn't mention this yet. So Dib is part of the Swollen Eyeball Network, which is just this secret organization of these conspiracy theorists like Dib. They're also paranormal investigators, and they just want to uncover the truths about all these paranormal activities, all these paranormal things like aliens and Bigfoot and stuff. And Dib's codename in that is Agent Mothman. So in that episode, he plants a... Actually, he doesn't plant it. He's trying to sneak into Zim's base, but then Gur just opens the door and Dib just hands him the camera. He's like, can you plant this so I can spy on you guys? And Gur just says, okie dokie. So then Dib's just watching the whole time, and every time something actually interesting is going on that can expose Zim as an alien, he calls the Swollen Eyeballs. But then, of course, once they show up, it's just back to normal things, where Zim is just sitting there eating waffles, or it's just looks like nothing out of the ordinary. So then at one point, Zim says, so Gur gives him waffles, and Zim says, hey, these aren't bad, what's in them? And Gur just says, there's waffles in them. And Zim just says, you're lying! And he just goes back to eating. Just calling everyone liars, I don't know. But in this episode, we're introduced to a character named Nick. And Zim says, Nick, neural experiment number 231. And how is the happiness probe in your brain doing today, filthy human? And Nick just says, it's great. I never want to leave this magical place. I'm so happy. And by the way, he's voiced by Jhonen Vasquez. But the reason they have this character Nick and why it's an overly happy character is because one of the notes that the network would give to this show was that they wanted it to be a happier show. So Jonen's way around it was, okay, let's throw in this overly happy character. And the character Nick, he just has this giant screw in his head, and he just has this enormous smile that won't budge. It's so unsettling. So he's just artificially happy. So that was his way of getting around Nickelodeon's notes. That's why the character is named Nick, and they say experiment 231 because Nickelodeon, the studio, that's the address. Fun fact. So later in that episode, so Zim keeps trying to talk about his next evil plan, but he just keeps delaying it. Then at one point there's a giant squid monster and attacking Zim, and Zim just says, Grr, defensive mode. And so Gur just takes out snow cones and hands them to the squid monster, and the squid monster's just looking at them as he's still attacking Zim. And then later in that episode, after all the chaos and everything, Zim just says, Gur, your waffles have sickened me. Fetch me the bucket. And he's just puking. And so then, unfortunately for poor Dib, some cyborgs are sent to his home and they destroy all his computers. And then at the end of the episode, Dib just screams, no, whatever. And he just goes to bed. So one of those moments where Dib just started to not care quite as much. But speaking of ways around network notes, before I bring this up, another moment that I can think of was in the episode Mortos de Soul Stealer. That's in season 2. One of the lines they had to change was they couldn't say the underworld. So when the character Mortos talks about where he's from, he says, I come from the place beneath the overworld. That's how they got around saying the underworld. Another line that they had to change was for the network was in the episode Invasion of the Idiot Dog Brain in season 1. They couldn't say shut up. And actually other Nickelodeon shows had gotten in trouble for that. I know for a fact Angry Beavers did, and they had to change it. And that was a whole other thing. But in Invader Zim, in that episode, instead of saying shut up, they changed it to Zim saying, shut your noise tube, taco human. Which is much better if you ask me. Another way they addressed notes, this is from the Christmas special, The Most Horrible Xmas Ever. At one point, so there's a character, this robot snowman who's telling a story about 2 million years ago. So this is even in the further future now, telling a story about Christmas, the most horrible Christmas ever. And so then at one point, one of the kids says, I don't get it. Why does he want to take over the earth so badly? What does he have to gain or to lose? And the machinations of this malfunctioning Santa suit completely elude me. And then the robot snowman, Mr. Sludgy, he just takes the kid and puts him under the bed, and he just says, as I was saying. And again, this was a note, that bit of dialogue from the kid, that was a note from Nickelodeon asking about the Santa suit that Zim built to once again try to take over the humans. So that was his way around it, just throwing it in the episode. And at that point, this episode was sadly the last episode to be produced. So at that point, I guess Nickelodeon just let them do whatever. So that's just in the episode. That episode's also fun because it features a song, and it's actually Richard Horvitz singing it. Actually, before I mention that kid saying all that stuff, he's voiced by Jhonen Vasquez. But anyway, with the song, so that's sung by Richard Horvitz and Melissa Fahn, and Melissa Fahn's just singing super high octaves, and Richard's singing lower, and then the song is bow down before the power of Santa, or be crushed by his jolly boots of doom. That episode is actually the only episode to feature another character that was supposed to be a more prominent character later on, called Mini Moose. And it's just a hovering robotic moose, also voiced by Jhonen, but all it does is squeak. It just goes, yeah, like it just makes little squeaking noises. And Zim created him in an unproduced episode called Nubs of Doom, but since they didn't get to make that episode, he's featured in this Christmas episode, so there's just a throwaway line with Zim saying, oh, that's my other sidekick, he's been with me the whole time. But Mini Moose is a far more competent sidekick than Gur, which isn't hard to do, to be fair. But speaking of unproduced episodes, so there are quite a few of them. And when the show was canceled, actually, Ricky Simons was working on an episode with one of the writers, and it was going to be an episode about some kind of squishy alien that was going to squish the Earth to death or something like that. But there were quite a few. So there are voice recordings out there of the episodes. There are also kind of fan-made versions of them. There are super talented fans out there that have animated their own versions of the episode using, similar Zim artwork and using the recordings from the voice actors. So one of the episodes is Mopiness of Doom. So that one, there's an animated version out there from fans, and there's also a script reading out there on the internet that you can find, Mopiness of Doom. And in that one, it's an actual moment where it would have been an interesting episode because basically Dib gives up on his conquest to defeat Zim and he decides to turn to real science, and then he decides to work with his dad, but without Dib to stop him, Zim just becomes so despondent because his mission kind of lacks a purpose, lacks a challenge, and so then he gets all sad, and then Dib ends up getting all sad, and then Gur decides to reunite them, and he says something like, oh, Mary, you gotta he misses you so much, something silly like that. But then Dib finally decides he wants to defeat Zim again, and then they just kind of are running around actually getting along. That would have been a great episode. Another great one would have been, it's called The Trial, and in that one they're deciding whether or not to kind of get rid of Zim. I might be misremembering that, but that's basically Zim is on trial, and we would have gotten to learn a little bit more about the Urkins, and the side plot of that one would have been Gur somehow taking over Earth like it was nothing, and in the end Zim gets to come back. Another one was 10 Minutes to Doom. Are you noticing the pattern with all the doom and everything in the episode titles? In that one, that would have been, so the Urkins have what's called a pack. It kind of looks like an egg on their backs, and so it's kind of like a backpack too, but if it falls off, that has all of their information, their personality, their actual life force in them. So it falls off in the episode, and Zim, there would have been a countdown clock counting down 10 minutes, kind of as an homage to the show 24 back when that was on the air. And so Zim would slowly be kind of withering away, and Dib takes his pack, and he's slowly becoming Zim. At one point he just says, I'll take over the filthy planet, because the pack is what holds Zim's personality. And then at the end, Zim takes Gaz's game slave because he wants Gaz to help him, and then at the end Zim just gets his pack back before he can collapse and disappear from existence. There's another unproduced episode called When Pants Ruled. Another one was Invader Punchi. Simon Says Doom. The pants one was supposed to be this alien race who looks like a pair of pants, but they couldn't do that episode because there was a similar episode with the show Jimmy Neutron with pants taking over the town. So it's unfortunate that the show was canceled so soon, but we will be getting Invader Zim Enter the Florpus. And just from seeing the trailer, it looks so visually stunning, truly. And the characters have been redesigned. They match more now their looks from the comic book series. And actually, the footage that we saw, since it was really just the first act, they were just getting back early cuts of animation, so they just put together a trailer just for Comic-Con back in July. But from what I saw, it looks amazing. But it's going to be, for the beginning anyway, a slight retelling of the first issue of the comic. Since in that one, in the comic book, the first issue, it's basically Dib hasn't left his chair for a really long time because he's just been spying on Zim, and Zim's been in hiding. And then Zim, basically, it was his plan all along to make Dib smelly and feeble. And Gur says, yes, Smeeble? And Zim says, yes, Smeeble. Hopefully that line will be in there. That's funny. But then Dib has to get back in shape because he wants to defeat Zim, of course. So I'm sure it's going to be similar. But already, I mean, there's a gag in the trailer with Gaz wearing a Gazmat suit. So that's already something funny and new. And I'm just really excited for it. It's called Invader ZIM Enter the Florpus. And I can't even begin to conjecture what the heck a Florpus is. We'll find out soon enough. But I'm just excited for more craziness, more Zim-Dib interaction, more insanity, more silly, funny moments, more amazing music, obviously. Just more being in this world. Getting to just go inside, really, Jhonen's imagination. Jhonen's awesome. I could just gush about Jhonen. But I actually haven't checked out much of his other works, though. I know he created stuff that wasn't geared towards kids. One of his comics is Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. May have to check that out at some point. We'll see. But I just love this show. It's just so funny, so dark. It just honestly fills me with this twisted sense of joy when I watch it. No other way to describe it. I'm super excited for Enter the Florpus. And if there's one thing I'd like to see, it's some kind of maybe new side to the characters, maybe. I mean, whatever we get, I'm just excited to see more of, Gur craziness. I know Minnie Moose will be in the special too. But also, I mean, Jhonen himself has said that all these characters are an absurdist version of you, it's an absurdist version of himself, and he said that Zim is confident to no end, this confidence that has no end, and that his greatest superpower is his inability to understand why he might fail, which is fantastic. And so that's why, so Zim is that overconfidence, Dib is that kid who just wants everyone to believe, Gaz is just the girl who just cares about video games. So all these are parts of Jhonen putting his personality into the characters, obviously. The fact that also a lot of them wear boots, because Jhonen always wears boots. But, so, for Enter the Florpus, I'm just excited to see these characters again, to just go back to have new content with this world, besides the comic books, but just to hear the voice actors again and all that. I'm very excited for that. And just a whole new storyline. It's going to be a 90-minute, really actually a 66-minute special, without the commercials, 66 minutes. Whatever it brings us, I know it's going to be amazing. I really can't wait for it. Hopefully it'll be out soon. We'll see. Still no air date yet. There's still no air date for the other Nickelodeon TV special coming out, Rocko's Modern Life Static Cling. That one, there's apparently behind-the-scenes issues going on in terms of where they want to broadcast it. So we'll see, because that was supposed to air sometime this year in 2018, and then this special, the Invader ZIM special, either 2018, possibly 2019. We'll have to wait and see. So yep, this show's awesome. I really love it. I can't praise the Jhonen enough, the voice actors enough, the storyboard artists, everyone who worked on this show, the composer Kevin Manthe, the writers, of course, too. I just really love this show. And so, with all that being said, I do have a Zim story to share. It's called Dodgeball of Doom. That's right, of course, gotta have Doom in there. So here we go. Without further ado, it's story time. On a typical bleak morning like today, It seemed as if nothing could ever penetrate the endless monotony. However, the students would soon learn they'd have a chance to add some excitement to their excruciatingly dull lives, as Miss Bitters had an announcement. "Children," the misanthropic teacher said, sitting at her desk, "I'm obliged to inform you that the school board has decided to reincorporate physical education back into the curriculum. Frankly, I couldn't care less about the so-called positive aspects of friendly competition or teamwork. But the way I see it, the less time I have to spend with you mongrels, the better off we'll all be." The students stared at her with blank expressions as they always did, not a single one of them the least bit rattled by the news. Dib was the first and only one to raise his hand. "Yes, Dib," Miss Bitters said. "I assume you have an infuriatingly inane question." Ignoring the dig, he asked, "Why was phys ed removed from the curriculum in the first place?" The elderly teacher pursed her hairy upper lip. "Let's just say there was a student who suffered an injury after he was accidentally impaled by a spiked shuttlecock," she said, holding up a pointed hand to make air quotes. "He has since regained his eyesight, and the lawsuit has been settled. So now you children get to reap the benefits of brutally competing with each other in organized sports." The students held their deadpan looks of indifference, all except for Zim, whose interest piqued at the prospect of engaging in extreme acts of violence against the inferior humans. Of course, by the time he marched into the gymnasium, his initial intrigue only dampened as he took in his new surroundings with increasing disgust. The gym smelled of sweaty socks and looked about as appealing as a rundown insane asylum. Dirty floors and flickering fluorescent lights. Not to mention the fact that everyone was being held there against their will. Even less appealing was the gym teacher, Mr. Cramps, whose grotesque rows of belly fat gave off the impression that he'd never exercised a single day in his entire life. He lugged over a mesh bag filled with dodgeballs and dropped it in front of the gathered students. "Welcome to gym class," he said in a gruff voice. "You kids are going to play dodgeball while I stand in the corner and regret every poor life decision I ever made that led me to this worthless occupation." Suddenly his eyes bulged with the realization that he'd revealed too much. He looked around shiftily and cleared his throat. I'll supervise. Any questions?" Zim's hand shot up. "Yes, kid with the hideous skin condition." "I was wondering if you could perhaps go over the rules of this, dodging of balls games of which you speak," Zim said, only to add, "Of course, as a completely normal Earth human, I am already familiar with the rules, but I'm sure it'll be helpful for the much, much dumber humans, such as, say, Dib." The paranormal-obsessed boy narrowed his eyes at Zim, who pointed an accusing finger at him, baring his teeth in an evil grin. "I know how to play dodgeball, Zim," Dib said. "Of course, I'm not an alien bent on destroying our entire planet." "Silence," Zim said as he shook a clenched fist. He promptly directed his mounting impatience at the gym teacher, pointing at him now as he shouted, "Speak, you monstrous pig beast!" Mr. Cramps scratched the back of his bald head, not exactly jumping at the opportunity to cater to Zim. However, he proceeded to reach into the bag and pull out a purple ball. "You divide into 2 teams and try not to get hit as you hurl balls at each other until only one person remains. Got that, green kid?" He tossed the ball to Zim, who caught it and held it up at eye level. His face scrunched in confusion as he twirled the ball around and gave it a squeeze. "It's so round and squishy. This hardly seems like a formidable weapon." "Yeah, whatever," Mr. Cramps said. "I need 2 of you to be team captains. Anyone interested?" Zim's eyes snapped open wide, and immediately he swept his arm up high and waved his hand around frantically. Me, pick Zim! There was no one else worthier of being team captain than Zim." He kept waving his hand back and forth with the speed of a rabid pigeon wildly flapping its wings, while Mr. Cramps stared out at the students without even a flinch, looking right past Zim as he put a hand to his flabby chin. "How about you 2? He pointed at the 2 smallest girls in the class. They exchanged a perplexed glance and shrugged, each of them walking forward to fulfill their duties as team captains. Zim, meanwhile, chucked the dodgeball in frustration. It bounced off the ground and hit him square in the face. "Curse you humans and your squishy balls of pain!" As he rubbed his freshly bruised face, Dib sidled up to him. "What's the matter, Zim?" he asked, filled with biting mockery. "Afraid you won't be able to keep up with us inferior humans and beat us at our own game?" Zim's eyes narrowed at his rival as he dropped his gloved claw from his face. "Foolish, pathetic Earth boy, you dare taunt Zim? Just wait and see as I destroy you all at this insolent game of dodgeball," Dib said. "Whatever," Zim said, and he capped off his promise of victory with a grand, maniacal laugh. He became so caught up in the moment that when he finally stopped, he realized everyone was now staring at him. He straightened up, not bothering to say anything to ward off the attention, as no one ever dared to question his random bursts of evil laughter. Sure enough, the students all turned away, uncaring as ever, and the two girls finally began picking their teammates. Zita, Lug, Faye, Kit, Mev, Torque. Back and forth they went, selecting different classmates to join their teams until, coincidentally, only Zim and Dib remained. The two of them bore similar looks of intense loathing, complete with furrowed brows and seething glares. With a disgruntled sigh, the first girl said, "I guess I'll pick Zim." "Eh?" Zim said, breaking eye contact with Dib to look quizzically at her for a moment, before he turned back to his foe and cackled. At last, prepared to be defeated by Zim. "Ugh," the second girl said. "That means Dib's stuck on our team. He's crazy." "Hey," Dib said, "I'm standing right here." "I know." Dib's brows sank as he sulked over and joined his reluctant teammates. It was bad enough getting picked last, but getting picked last over his mortal enemy who, until mere moments ago, didn't even know what dodgeball was, only added salt to the festering wound. With this cruel knowledge eating away at him, a fire ignited in Dib, and his face hardened with cold determination as a single thought entered his mind. Zim's going down. Mr. Cramps blew his whistle, and with that, the game commenced. As dodgeballs flew back and forth across the room, Dib kept his eyes on Zim, who did nothing at first. The alien simply stood there, his disguised eyeballs darting around as dodgeballs struck his teammates one by one. Eventually, a ball rolled towards him, and he stared at it for a while before hesitantly scooping it up. Right at that moment, Dib knew he was in for it. As expected, Zim locked eyes with him, a sadistic grin spreading across his face, his target set. With little time to react, Dib made a run for it as Zim heaved the ball in his direction. He managed to duck behind an unsuspecting girl whose bangs covered her eyes. The dodgeball instead collided into Keith, knocking him flat on his back. A mere moment later, though, he sprang back up, completely unharmed, and skipped over to the bleachers with the other eliminated players, grinning like the happy little fool he was. Zim stomped his foot and clenched his hands so hard they trembled at his sides. During this bout of blind rage, a ball flew towards him, only to skim past his head, missing it by barely an inch. Zim's eyes snapped open wide as he blinked and looked around in alarm, before his gaze zeroed in on Dib yet again. He narrowed his eyes, as did Dib. The two of them stood still, staring each other down, even as kids ran around in failed attempts to avoid getting hit by a dodgeball. Their rapidly dwindling teams didn't deter either one of them, though, as their focus remained solely on each other. Zim unclenched his fists, leaving his hands hanging at his sides. Dib took a step backward and then another, slowly making his way to an abandoned dodgeball, all the while never once taking his eyes off of his opponent. When he reached the ball, he picked it up and raised it above his head, ready to throw. At that same moment, Zim reached behind his back and somehow, amazingly, withdrew a dodgeball. Dib's eyes widened, while Zim's smirk only grew larger. The second Zim threw the ball, Dib took off, and the dodgeball wound up hitting Gretchen, who'd been staring longingly at Dib the whole time. Fueled with agitation for once again missing his target, Zim rushed over to one of his teammates, Torque, and snatched the ball out of the larger boy's hands. Immediately, Zim chucked the ball, sending it hurtling at the opposing team and knocking out another random student. In a frenzy, Zim stole another ball out of someone's hands and launched it at Dib, who dashed out of the line of fire just in time. Zim slapped a hand to his forehead, digging his fingers into his flesh as if he wanted to claw his own face in sheer infuriation. Dib decided to seize the opportunity to knock him out while he was down, and with no time to waste, he threw his dodgeball. There wasn't as much power behind his toss, but his aim was precise, and he could already feel the excitement building as he knew Zim was done for good. Sadly for him, an oblivious Torque wandered in front of Zim. The ball bounced off his stomach and Dib's heart dropped. Torque froze, looking down at the ball and back up at Dib, glaring at him, when suddenly his eyes filled with tears. He hung his head in shame as he slumped off to the bleachers. At that point, Dib took a moment to look around and realized he and Zim were miraculously the only two players left in the game. He didn't have time to dwell on it as Zim had already swiped up a ball in preparation for his next attack. Dib looked around in desperate search of another ball, and he finally spotted one in the corner of the room. He looked back at Zim, who now stood calmly, which was all the more unsettling. Dib held his stance, exhaling a quiet breath. Zim's grasp tightened around the dodgeball, and a second later Dib took off running. Still, Zim waited. Dib was breathing hard now as he grabbed the dodgeball and turned back to see a ball hurtling at him. He ducked, and the ball slammed into the wall. Now Zim froze, his eyes darting around in a panic for another ball. Dib panted, knowing it was now or never. With Zim caught off guard, he hurled the ball with all the strength he had. Zim's eyes bulged as he turned to make a run for it, but it was too late. The ball hit him in the back, and the sight unfolded for Dib in glorious slow motion as Zim let out a long, agonizing cry and collapsed to the ground. He lay there as the ball bounced away, the sound echoing throughout the silent gymnasium. Mr. Cramps blew the whistle. "Congratulations, Tib, your team wins," he said with no emotion, and he turned away. "I'm going to go eat my weight in donuts." Dib simply stood there motionless, far too shell-shocked to point out that he'd pronounced his name incorrectly. All he could do was stare at Zim, who slowly dragged himself to his feet, pressing a splayed hand to his back as he straightened his spine or whatever it was he had inside his nasty alien body. "I won," Dib said, letting the words sink in for a moment before a burst of euphoria consumed him. "I won! Ha! I've defeated you. How does it feel to lose to a human, huh, space boy?" He laughed uproariously, oblivious to the fact that as he celebrated his victory, Zim was already plotting his revenge. "You should have seen him, Gaz," Dib said, still talking about his win hours later. He looked so dejected, so incredibly miserable over his humiliating defeat. "I wish I'd had my camera." Gaz sat next to him at their otherwise empty lunch table, playing her game slave too. "How many times do I have to tell you, before you finally get it through that obnoxiously big head of yours, that I don't want you to talk to me at lunch, let alone ever, Dib?" Dib blinked and lowered his arms as he glanced at his sister and asked, in genuine curiosity, "Then why do you always sit with me?" Gaz snapped her head up, glowering at him with her perpetually squinting eyes, a menacing scowl on her face. She lowered her head and returned to playing her game without a word. Dib simply shrugged and grabbed his poop juice box, taking a sip. "Dib, human!" Dib spit out his drink and turned around to find Zim standing there with a calculating grin on his face. "What do you want, alien scum?" The corner of Zim's mouth ticked up. "I'm glad you asked," he said, and he placed a hand on his chest. "I, the amazing, brilliant Zim, challenge you, the filthy, worthless Dib, to a rematch of dodging ball during, skippy, frolicking playground time." "It's called recess," Dib said. "Who cares?" Zim said, throwing up both hands as his fingers writhed like spindly wires. He paused, collecting himself, and dropped his hands. "So, what do you say, Dib? Will you accept my challenge, or will you cower back in smelly fear, proving once and for all that I truly am the superior being?" Dib lowered his eyebrows, the spark of wrath igniting once more. "You'll never be superior, Zim," he said in as threatening a tone he could muster, which admittedly wasn't much. "And if it's a rematch you want, fine, I'll play your stupid game. I just hope you'll be prepared to lose all over again." "Oh, don't worry, I will come very prepared," Zim said. He spread out his arms and let out another evil laugh, one that quickly grew in intensity, before he stopped on a dime and walked away in silence. "He won't win," Dib said. "Mark my words, Gaz. I'll defeat him again. You'll see." "Oh, how I wish I cared," Gaz said, every word dripping with scathing sarcasm. Zim slipped into an empty hallway after surveying the parameters to ensure no one was there. Once clear, his pack produced a mechanical rod, which opened into a video screen to reveal his robot servant Gur back at their base. He sat on the couch, mindlessly watching TV. "Gur!" Gur's eyes glowed red as he snapped to attention and gave a salute. "Yes, master." "Pay close attention," Zim said. "I need you to go down to the lab and retrieve the cloaking device I've been working on. Bring it to school immediately." Gur's red eyes faded back to their usual blue. "Aw, but I want to watch my show," he whined. "The monkey's getting hit with the mallet." "You can watch your idiotic show after you bring me my cloaking device," Zim said. "Now be a good robot slave and fetch me the device, Gur. Hurry." "Okie dokie." The call transmission ended. Gur hopped off the couch and wandered into the kitchen, heading towards the secret passageway toilet that led to the lab. The nearby refrigerator caught his eye, and he halted in his tracks, staring at the fridge with rapt attention. He placed his hands on his metallic tummy. "I'ma make some food." At recess, Zim looked for any sight of Gur. "Where is he? My entire plan relies on using that device. Why was my evil scheme be foiled by such an incompetent henchman? Why?" "Well, well, well," Dib said, stepping in front of Zim. "Talking to yourself, huh? and I thought I was the only one who did that on a regular basis. What's wrong, Zim? Cracking under the pressure as you await your inevitable loss. Never, Zim said. I'm just waiting for my, pizza delivery. Pizza delivery, Dib said, raising a brow before shaking his head. Look, are we going to play this annoying game already? Or can we move on from this pointlessness so I can return to my ongoing quest to put a stop to you? You shall never stop me, Zim said, but a second later he folded his arms, conceding. Fine, I'll just have to do this without my pizza. Let us play dodge the ball. It's, whatever, close enough, Dib said, and he headed towards the opposite end of the crudely drawn concrete field. Let's get this over with, alien menace. Menace? I like that, Zim said. Prepare for your demise, Dib. He took out a dodgeball and hurled it, watching in rising anticipation as it flew towards Dib, who caught it with both hands. That's game, Dib said. Eh? Impossible. No, it's the rules, Dib said, placing the ball on the ground. I'm gonna go now. Dib walked away while Zim clenched his teeth, boiling over in an uncontrollable rage. He glanced from side to side and dove behind a nearby bush. His pack produced the video screen again to show Gurr, who stood at the kitchen counter, covered with specks of what appeared to be pink sludge. Gurr! A wide grin stretched across Gurr's face as he waved. Hi! What's taking you so long? I need my cloaking device. Oh yeah, Gurr said. Bring it to me now, Gurr. And what is that filth all over you? Gurr stopped and looked himself over as if noticing the mess for the first time. I don't know. Well, clean yourself up and get down here. I refuse to wallow in the stink of failure by allowing Dib to have this victory. He ended the call, but Gurr didn't move. He simply stood there, his tongue hanging out of his mouth, not a care in the universe. Only when the oven timer rang did he erupt with excitement. Yay, food! Meanwhile, Zim stepped out of the shrub, when out of nowhere a light shined directly in his face. He shielded his eyes, stumbling backward, while he felt his foot tap something. A tiny object lay at his feet, glinting off the sunlight, and his eyes popped in recognition. He picked up the small object, a microchip that had fallen out of his pack. With a wicked grin, Zim rushed up to Dib, who sat by himself in the corner of the playground, reading a copy of Stupid Aliens magazine. You think this is over, Dib? Think again, Earth Monkey, for I, Zim, challenge you to another rematch of Balling Dodge. Dib looked up from his magazine and sighed. As anticlimactic as my second victory was, I always enjoy seeing you fail, so fine, whatever. Excellent, Zim said. He walked back to the field with an apathetic Dib in tow. Picking up the infernal dodgeball, Zim clutched it tightly, this time refusing to get ahead of himself by throwing it too soon at his nemesis. And so he waited. And waited. And waited. Minutes stretched, though Zim did nothing but hold the ball and stare down Dib, who eventually folded his arms. Okay, I don't know what type of mind trickery you're trying to pull, Zim, but I'm getting tired of standing around doing nothing, so either throw the ball or... The bell rang. Oh, well, look at that. Playground time is over, Zim said in haste. Looks like we'll have to wait to continue our game after school. Dib's eyes narrowed. Fine, we'll play it your way. I'll still beat you. As Dib walked off, Zim ran his palm along the dodgeball where he'd planted the microchip. It sparked with electricity, steadily charging. We'll just see about that, won't we, Dib? What? Zim looked up to see Dib standing close by. Nothing at all. Be gone with you! Dib stared at him in suspicion for a beat, but finally he turned away and headed back into school. Zim stashed the dodgeball into his pack and followed. At the end of the school day, Zim stood on the front steps of the building, cradling the now fully charged dodgeball, which glowed in ominous, translucent red. The second Dib walked out with his sister, he jumped in front of them. I hope you enjoyed your puny victory, Dib, for it will be your last. Dib blinked, looking around. How long have you been standing out here? Do not question me. Okay. Dib turned to his sister. You go ahead, Gaz. This shouldn't take long. In fact, Gaz retreated down the school steps without looking back. Dib watched her for a moment before turning back to Zim, at which point he finally noticed the glowing sphere in his hands. Hey, wait a second. The ball. What'd you do to it? I'm afraid I haven't the slightest idea what you're talking about, Zim said. Don't play coy with me, Zim. I bet you used some kind of bizarre alien technology to make the ball all weird and glowy. So what if I did? So what? That's cheating. Is it? Zim said. Because as I recall, it was you who said we'll play it my way. So, Dib, we shall play my way. The ball illuminated even brighter, and Dib's eyes grew wide. Gaz sat alone at the kitchen table when her father entered, not in person, but on his hovering screen. "Good evening, daughter. How was school today?" "Stupid." Professor Membrane let out a hearty chuckle. "Well, that's too bad, as a good education is the backbone of a thriving society. Now then." Two robotic arms shot out of the screen, cradling a bowl of soupy beef stew in each. "Let's—" he gasped. "Egad, where is your brother?" "Playing dodgeball with his best friend Zim," Gaz said. "Ah, yes, the foreign boy," Professor Membrane said. "I'm glad your brother has found a nice little friend with whom he gets along so splendidly. Nevertheless, you know the rules. Nobody eats until all family members are physically present at the table." "But you're not physically present," Gaz said. "How come that stupid rule doesn't apply to you?" A short silence followed, and for a moment Gaz thought the screen had frozen, until her dad let out another hearty laugh. "Well, honey, when you grow up and become a parent one day, you can make as many stupid rules that only benefit you and your selfish needs as you want," Professor Membrane said. The robotic limbs retreated, taking the bowls with them. "That said, you should run along now and find your brother so we can all enjoy dinner together. Until then, all food is on lockdown." The entire kitchen flashed with red lights as a siren went off, and locked chains wrapped around the refrigerator, cupboards, and drawers. Once complete, the alarm ceased, and Professor Membrane's floating screen disappeared into another room. Alone once more, Gaz grit her teeth, growling with the ferocity of a feral beast. "Dib." Dib's ragged breathing pounded in his ears as he sprinted down the street with Zim gaining on him. An extended claw from his pack held up the dodgeball, which had inflated 100 times its normal size. He let out a demonic laugh. "You can't run forever, Dib." "When's he going to throw that stupid dodgeball already?" Dib asked himself, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. "It's been hours." The answer came a moment later when Zim launched the massive ball at him. Dib leapt out of the way just in time, landing in a heap on the sidewalk. He panted heavily and watched as the ball rolled down the street. Nobody seemed to notice, and in fact, the ball missed every single person who happened to walk in its path. A telephone pole soon punctured it, and the glow faded as the enormous ball deflated across a busy intersection. Cars swerved, avoiding a collision, and everyone involved in the ordeal came out entirely unscathed. Zim went rigid. His eyes twitched. His jaw clenched. His hands tightened, and finally he screamed at the top of his non-existent lungs, his lizardly tongue contorting. "What kind of cruel, horrible joke is this? How is it even possible that I still have yet to hit Dib's head? It's ginormous! Oh, if only I had my... Grrr!" The robot, dressed in his doggy disguise, trotted over to Zim with a plastic bag in hand. "Finally, my loyal minion, you've brought me my cloaking device. Give it here, Grrr." Grrr reached into the bag and dropped something into Zim's outstretched hand. Zim's once eager grin wiped off his face as he stared at the foreign object, a mushy ball. He brought it closer and gave it a poke, only to grimace. "What in the name of Urk is this revolting item?" "I'm me meatballs," Grrr said. He took out another one and popped it into his mouth, chewing in a few messy bites. "Balls of meat?" Zim said. His eyes popped with a revelation. "That's what was covered all over you earlier. Flecks of uncooked, fleshy, human food." As Grrr chowed down, Dib approached them, brushing some debris off himself. "Well, I guess we know once and for all who the true superior being is, huh, Zim?" "Yes, of course, we've known that all along, and the answer is Zim!" He tossed the meatball at Dib, hitting him in the face and leaving behind chunks of meat as it slid off and landed on the ground. Zim cackled some more. "At last, victory for Zim!" Dib wiped the food off his face, pausing to take a bite of it. "This is a meatball. Doesn't matter, I win." "No, you don't. Besides, I'm still in the lead with 2 wins. "Nuh-uh, you lost. Deal with it." "Okay, now you're just being annoying. I'm not R2. I'm not R2. I'm not R... Hey, Dib!" Both Dib and Zim snapped their heads to find Gaz standing several feet away, grasping a thick black ball with a skull painted on it. "Gaz," Dib said, "I'm glad you're here. And what a coincidence you brought a ball. I could use it to..." With a vicious snarl, Gaz hurled the ball at Dib. It whipped through the air at lightning speed, smacking him in the head and knocking him face first to the ground. She walked over and picked him up by the wrist, dragging his unconscious body along the pavement, while Zim's eyes followed her. "The Dib sibling is a commendable warrior," he said, before swiftly dismissing the thought and raising his hands in triumph. "Soon I will conquer all of you pathetic humans." Halfway down the block, Dib let out a garbled noise of agony as he lifted his head to reveal a large, throbbing welt. Did I win? He asked in a daze. Gaz glanced down at him. Even with his bruised-up face and his glasses askew, he still had that maddening spark of deranged hope in his eyes. A rare chord of pity struck her, and she heaved a sigh. "Hang on," she said, and she dropped his limp wrist. She stepped over him and walked over to her forgotten dodgeball, picking it up. "Hey, Zim!" "Heh?" Gaz launched the ball, sending it hurtling at Zim and hitting him upside the head. He flipped over and, like Div, face-planted into the ground. Victorious, Gaz scooped up her ball and grabbed her brother by the wrist to resume dragging him down the sidewalk. Dib managed to pump his fist before passing out cold again. As for Zim, he lay sprawled across the ground, moaning, when Gur walked up. He plopped himself on top of the defeated alien, who let out a yelp, but did nothing to protest as Gur happily scarfed down the rest of his meatballs. Alright, that was Dodgeball of Doom. Obviously Gaz turned out to be the winner in the end. And I knew this was going to be a long episode because I had a lot to say about this show, and also because that story is actually the longest one I've shared to date. It's about 5,000 words long. So with that, that's going to... Oh my gosh. I've talked too much, I can't talk anymore. So with that, that's going to conclude this episode of Storytelling Saga. You can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Storytelling Saga, as well as on Twitter at Storytell Saga. You can also send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by leaving a message in the contact section at storytellingsaga.com or by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, I got you to look after me, and you got me to look after you. I'll be discussing Of Mice and Men. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.